let's see, there I am. Jonathan, this is going to be a new format for our board. Everybody should just be let in to this meeting, or do they need to raise their hand to be let in?
I'll have to promote them to panelist.
Yeah, everybody who wants to be in this meeting should be bumped up to panelist. And then I think I'm going to be the only one who will be sharing screen.
See, I can promote you to panelist, but right now everybody's joining and it is automatically put as an attendee, so that way they can't Zoom bomb us.
Okay, so how, like, they don't know this format. So I'm guessing, do they need to just raise their hand? Or how do you signal that you want to be promoted? as a
It'd be
panel?
better if somebody knew who to let in.
Every single person should be let into this meeting. We've never had an issue. I think this is just a new 2021 policy that you guys made it webinar format, but this has really been a pretty, it's historic preservation. It's admit everybody, please. It's not going to be that many.
Greetings, folks.
Hey,
Hello.
It looks like
Hello.
they were starting to show up. Because at first I was like, oh, I can't do anything here. Interesting.
Yeah, I think for 2022, we're going to have a webinar format assigned to this meeting. So, you know, just a little extra loopholes to get into the meeting, but it's supposed to, I don't know, can't explain it.
Yeah, something is different. Who knows?
We'll figure it out later, maybe.
We'll roll with it.
Whatever it is. There's, let's see, 7 voting members. Am I counting right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay.
Mhm.
Tammy, where are you on, let's see, who's missing? Polly? Did you hear from Polly?
I did, yeah,
Okay.
she accepted.
Okay. My mind is blank. Are we missing anybody else? Maybe not, because,
No,
right, number 9 is open still. Okay.
Let's go through every D name we know.
Okay.
oh, I can make a fun announcement. Well, we can get started in a second.
I am reminded how many D names there are, Devin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Well, let's see, it's 5:30. We could certainly call the meeting to order.
Just want to tell you, I'm going to click off my camera and turn off my voice because I got a big plate of food here and you don't want to
Oh.
see this destruction.
All right, and I'll remind
Okay.
everyone that I'll be ducking out at 7 o'clock, but since this is recorded, I can still continue with the minutes. Just later.
Okay. Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and share screen.
Let me get my stuff here. 'Cause I need to exit full screen. So we have called the meeting to order. We do have joining us, Susan Salmon is joining us, has reapplied to our board. I have not heard any thing about anything from the commissioners or anyone else about formal appointment, nor has she. But she said she wanted to sit in on the meeting, which is certainly appropriate and welcome. So Susan is joining us for this meeting. The first thing that we actually need to do, I don't see that they have joined yet. The first thing that we actually need to do is we have a request to amend the agenda. And so we will need to vote to do that. And I honestly, Tammy, I'm not sure if this will be old business or new business because I don't know how that plays in. But in
It
any
is.
case, I'm sorry.
You can say whichever you want it to
Okay.
be.
We can decide whichever one it wants to be. There's 2 things, and I forgot. We do have old business. When Tammy sent out the draft agenda, I forgot that we're supposed to briefly discuss the Cascades National Register nomination. So that's an amendment to the agenda under old business. And then we also have a request to discuss further the dry stone walls on the Rumpke property. There's a lot of updates with that, and we need to discuss the preservation plan aspect of that project. And we have Polly, good, Polly's joining us. And maybe not yet, but we're supposed to have Kevin Meyer with Rumpke joining us to discuss that project. So I hope he does remember to come on to the, so in any case, so that is the, we need to vote to amend the agenda to add those 2 items. And that, I guess, could also serve as an attendance roll call.
Say so moved.
I'll second.
Right. Then I will call the roll, which is also going to serve as attendance. Let's see. So this is a motion to amend the agenda to add the items regarding Cascades Park update and the Rumpke Preservation Plan updates. Debbie Reed,
Yes.
Duncan Campbell,
Yes.
Danielle Bashant Bell,
Yes.
Don Maxwell, Don Hall,
Yes.
Devin Blankenship,
Yes.
Doug Wilson,
Yes.
and Polly Root Sturgeon.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Okay. So the first item we will look at is the approval of the meeting minutes from December 20th of 2021.
I'm just gonna pop these live in here. Did anyone have any issues from December 20th? Hopefully you had a chance to actually read through these. It was a kind of a short meeting. Well, shorter.
No corrections or edits? Well, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Do you mind telling me who those two, I think it was Debbie who was the second.
Duncan moved and Debbie seconded.
Great, thanks. All right, and so let's go with agenda, let's see. We'll go Polly Root Sturgeon. Is the motion to approve the minutes from
Yes.
December 20th, 2021. Doug Wilson,
Yes.
Devin Blankenship,
Yes.
Don Hall,
Yes.
Don Maxwell,
Yes.
Danielle Bashant Bell,
Yes.
Duncan Campbell,
Yes.
and Debbie Reed.
Yes.
Motion to pass the minutes 8-0. So, there we go. Here we go.
Do we have no administrative business, or Tammy, did you have something new to add?
Oh, just that, the planning department, we hired a new planner. We hope that they start March the 1st. That was as soon as they could get housing in the town of Bloomington. His name is Daniel Brown, and he has historic preservation in his background. So it's another D name, I know, but I would hope to get him trained up to speed because he's going to have an eye for probably some of your goals and, you know, be of a person of interest for sure for the board.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Where's he coming from?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Interesting. Further?
So yeah, it might be a month or two before you actually get to meet him in Zoom world. So
Right, yeah. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what his background is. Okay, well, cool. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So let's just go ahead and like I said, I'm hoping that Kevin with Rumpke does remember that he said he would join us for this meeting. So in the interim.
Danielle, this is Kevin. Can you hear me?
He's here. He's here. I was looking at participants. I see you now. Yes, thank you. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, so but real quickly, we will cover the Cascades National Register nomination information that in December we said that we had more time for everybody to read this document if you so choose. This is the National Register nomination, and come back with any comments that I will then pass on to Gloria so that she has them tomorrow so that she can get her report into DHPA. So does anyone have any comments or input on that nomination?
I mean, I ultimately support the nomination. I would have to dig into some more details on it, but I think the architecture of the park is definitely telling of a time. The fact that it's placed as the entryway into Bloomington on a historic, Dixie Highway route would definitely be another factor, and the fact that it's so closely tied in with our local and national limestone industry.
Any other comments? I mean, Devin, would you like me to pass comments like that on to Gloria, or is it basically, I mean,
I'd say, I mean, as you see fit, if there's anything that feels redundant, you don't need to say, and also, but if there's anything that's helps give perspective, 'cause I'm not sure, I would have to go back to the packet again. I'm not sure, timing wise with things like, Dixie Highway System, the fact that it was such a limited number of north-south roads were designated to encourage tourism, and the fact that Cascades would be along that tourism route. But then also, I think the WPA element itself is a major, telling of the times, and fact that everything's limestone, and the limestone probably comes from less than a mile away. So I think that that's significant. Now, did they close? This is something I don't know. Did they close the pool at Cascades because of polio, or are those unrelated things? Does anybody know that?
I don't know. I didn't do the nomination, so
Okay.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
Because they had a pool and they closed the pool, but I'm not sure if I've conflated the polio scare with pools with that or not.
Hmm. Does anyone else have any thoughts or comments on that nomination?
Oh, it was pretty well done.
Right.
No, I didn't go through every detail of it, but I thought it was very adequate for what it's trying to do. And it makes the points that Devin was talking about pretty adequately. I don't remember anything about polio, but otherwise, I think it's quite adequate.
And I think I put in my email when I resent all of that, the explanation of what the confusion was last month is that technically it wasn't supposed to be put on Gloria's plate up front. It was supposed to go to the Bloomington HPC last after coming to us or anyone else. So she was having to backtrack, and that's why the HPC had not seen it yet either. Why Duncan didn't remember seeing it. So but that's what I told her we would, since she had to have more time for the HPC, then we would have that more time. Anyone else have any thoughts on it that I should pass on? No?
I would just say that Rosemary Miller 20 years ago suggested that this be done. So maybe she'll, roll over or something for us. She'd be very happy to see this.
I'm sure she would, and I want to say it's probably even been longer than 20 years because I remember seeing files and files and files of this stuff of Cascades when I got here 20 years ago. So
I had a question on the map. That hill going up to the golf course clubhouse, that's included in the proposed area, right?
I
think so, from their hand-drawn map.
Yeah.
That really steep hill. Well, if it is, that section, it goes from the waterfall shelter all the way up to the clubhouse. That has an exposed series of limestone units. That's probably the best exposure of that kind of limestone in southern Indiana. It's got about 5 stratigraphic units right next to each other, and you usually don't get to see so many different kinds of bedrock all in one big section like that. So on my work side of things, I've taken several field trips there to use it as a geological example. So just they might want to add that in as another part of the natural resource in addition to the historical importance. I can write that in the email too if you needed to.
It might not hurt. I'm trying to take some notes, but honestly, that's the whole idea with the comments is to, so that the HPC can go back to the consultants and say, hey, we'd like to have some of this added, before this goes to DHPA and starts to be formalized. So if there's anything like that, that anyone feels strongly about that, maybe isn't called out well enough, now's the time to do it, because this is, these nominations get done and they don't typically get redone. So this goes down in history. So if you can put something like that in a quick email, even if it's just 1 or 2 sentences, and say, it'd be great to add something about this, and maybe they could contact me for more information or whatever, about any of the comments. That can be helpful to me, but also to Gloria, because she's new in her job. She was not in her job when this project started, so I think she's still kind of learning a lot of this. So if you'd be able to do that, I'm sure even if it took a couple of days, she'd be fine with that.
Yeah, I can write it up and send it to her.
Awesome, thanks. Any other thoughts? Okay. So hearing none on that, we can move on to, we will just call the dry stone walls old business, since we've already discussed this and we've already talked about the preservation plan and all that. So we'll just put this under old business. Seems to make sense to me. So just as a bit of information, again, we have Kevin Meyer with Rumpke. He's a site engineer with Rumpke, and he is on the call, on the Zoom meeting with us to help explain a lot of what's happening. So Tammy's pulling up an email from Kevin that he sent the other day, just to back up and update everyone. On Wednesday this past week, Jane Woolley with Drystone Conservancy was finally able to get up here, following the ability for Kevin to finally be able to reach the adjacent property owner where the wall runs between the 2 properties. That took a lot of work and time. So Jane was able to make the trip up. I met with Kevin and Jane and Cheryl Munson out at the site, and we walked the entire length. I think Kevin can correct me, but I think he said it's 1,100 feet of wall, based on their site plan and survey and all of that. And so we walked from one end to the other, getting a lot of information from Jane and her wonderful expertise on walls. Particularly interesting was the fact that when we got to the west end, it is a curve rather than a right angle corner. And she said that's very rare to see. She was calling out type of stone and placement and all kinds of interesting things about the wall and what she was seeing. Some sections are in good shape, some sections are in not so good shape. Some sections have been what I'll call disturbed by previous site disturbance, where that land was created into the industrial park it is now. So it seems like the wall was effectively buried over time by soil erosion and things like that. So as we walked and talked, we discovered that there's a lot of vegetation on both sides of the wall, a lot of invasive vegetation, trees, as well as small stuff. And so a lot of the insight that we were getting from Jane is what it will take for her organization to complete the preservation plan that our board has essentially said that Rumpke needs to have in order for them to move forward with their project. And what we encountered was some difficulty with the time frame and what we're finding there, what Jane and Russell, her staff person, what they will need as far as clearance from vegetation in order to do their documentation. And then with Rumpke and having their time frame for doing certain things, it basically came down to when we were walking for what, Kevin, like 3 hours, I think. This board needs to discuss the situation and potentially making some adjustments to the requirements in terms of time frame and possibly creating a phased plan, which Cheryl also understood makes a lot of sense based on the constraints that we found from the site. So I would like to allow Kevin to now jump in and basically from his side, his perspective, he and Jane have had more conversation. I know he's also meeting with Spencer Gale of Ecologic to get information from Spencer on clearing out the invasives and potentially moving forward with that. But all those things take time. But I want to let Kevin basically tell us what it is that he needs from us to help their project move forward, as well as the requirements of the preservation plan to happen. So Kevin.
Thanks, Danielle. Really appreciate you guys adding us to the agenda here to shed some more light on this project and where we're at with everything so we can continue making some good progress on it. So as Danielle already mentioned, we had a pretty good site visit, a long site visit this last Wednesday, looking at almost 1,100 feet of the dry stack limestone wall. And I'm going to kind of focus in here on the timeline items that's important to Rumpke to help, meet the requirements of this project and preserve this wall. So that snippet up front where it says conditions of approval for the conditional use variance, that was obviously a direct comment from the planning department's review of our site plan. And if you're not already familiar, for us in our process, the site plan is kind of step one to get approved before we can start, our driveway or right-of-way permit application for approval, and then also the grading permit, which is required. And I'm listing those threes because those are our critical path items before we can even get a contractor on the site to start working on the new resource recovery facility that Rumpke is going to build there sometime this year. And a specific point of that comment indicates that the preservation plan has to include a field and condition survey along with the long-term maintenance commitment. And when I was educated by Jane on site, she made it pretty clear that the pre-existing survey is a critical component of that. And she cleared out kind of like a 10-foot test section, removing all the deadfall and undergrowth and some things that she could. And it's pretty clear for them to do the documentation, they need a clear shot of the wall, no obstructions, so that they can get that pre-existing condition. And hopefully Danielle will attest to this as we walk that wall. There is a lot of stuff that has to be removed before that detailed documentation of the condition survey can even take place. At least that's how I interpreted what Jane was describing, that you guys have to make my little 10-foot section here look like that along the whole 1,100-foot stretch. And there's some heavy, dense growth, particularly as you work your way west along the wall to some of the adjacent properties. So I saw some timing concerns with that, just because we are going to approach EcoLogic. I'm actually meeting them on site this coming Friday, the 28th. I'm going to Bill Goins, who's going to be our district manager out there and really overall responsible at the site. We're both going to meet him and talk with Spencer about developing a proposal to clear that side of the wall to kind of help us meet the expectations that the Dry Stone Conservatory is looking for. She's laid out, I'm paraphrasing from Jane, but I can't complete the full requirements of a preservation plan without having this removal of all the invasives and everything away first. So that could be a potential timing issue. There's one, we've got to get with EcoLogic and get a proposal. I would definitely like to get at least one other person to bid on it, just so we can compare pricing, right? So there's some timing just to get someone on board to perform these services. So I know there's a long story there, but tying into this phased approach is, as it reads now, we may not have this conditions of approval approved by the county unless we have the complete preservation plan. And my interpretation is you got to survey the whole wall. So I'm concerned timing wise, if we have to wait until all of this is done before Jane and her team can complete the work, it might push us back 1 month, 2 months, depending on how things go. So kind of respectfully requesting, could we consider a phased approach where we still look at the long-term maintenance commitment, because that's important to the county. And we look at a portion of the preservation plan or a portion of the survey to satisfy getting our site plan approved first, and tying the complete survey as like an ultimate, approval. Like, let's get started. Let's essentially approve our site plan pending the full survey, so that we can at least start down the route of the grading permit and the driveway permit, so we can let our prospective contractors know, hey, it's okay to start breaking ground and getting on site. We also want to educate those contractors, right, about the wall and its importance to everyone and how to respect it, stay away from it, buffer zones, things of that nature. So does that kind of help shed some light, Danielle, on what we discussed on site? I want to talk about the timing for us to get past this site plan review, meet the conditions you're looking for, maybe help us out a little bit time-wise. I just think it's going to take some time. And with how much Jane and Russell are going to have to document, and they have some other scheduling conflicts. I don't know when we can safely say they'll be on site. They could do a comprehensive survey of all 1,100 feet. I just don't know when that's going to happen. So kind of asking for an intermittent step so that we can keep both projects in a parallel track, if that makes sense.
It does, Kevin, and I will interject further, just 2 comments for the board members. Number 1, Jane will not be doing this work without Russell's help, and Russell is currently still on paternity leave. So it will be a while before he's back in the office. So obviously, and then they have workshops and other things that they're planning. So like, as Kevin alluded to, they can't necessarily rush up here the minute he's back in the office. So it will take a little time. It will be a little bit more time before they're able to come back, as Jane said, this spring, to tackle that part of it. And I will also say that Cheryl Munson, who brought all of this to our attention to start with, being on site the other day and walking as much as she could, she is in agreement. She said she would have been at this meeting to comment, but she had another meeting commitment, but she is in agreement with the idea that yeah, and you can see the email comments there, that a phased approach makes sense. I think as an archaeologist, she understands, and as a former board chair of this board, she understands that sometimes you have to tweak, you have to tweak these things to make it work. And I can agree, I will agree with Kevin, once we got to, particularly as we walked west, not only is there a lot of vegetation, but the ground has been disturbed in such odd ways that it's really difficult to get in there, as it is now, just to walk. I mean, so Kevin is correct. So, and at this point, I think, unless Kevin has any further comments to make, we'll just start allowing board members to ask questions of Kevin or me or Tammy. Tammy just being, obviously this is new for her too in a lot of sense, but from the administrative side of things too. But does anyone have any immediate comments or questions?
Danielle, if I
Yes,
may, I did
sure.
want to comment on the one additional consideration, just to give a holistic picture of our day in the field. And, I did have some more conversations with Jane. So if you don't mind
Oh, right.
scrolling back up to my email, I just figured it's worth bringing this up now.
Right.
So one challenge I think we all identified on site, and I heard, Cheryl and Jane echo as well, is dealing with the adjacent property owner. So there is a considerable amount of vegetation on their side of the stone fence, probably more so than on the Rumpke side of the property. And she's indicated, I won't get into the details, but not wanting like heavy equipment or other things on her property. She's not local here is my understanding, but I believe someone else farms the land, if that's correct. So the thing I got from Jane is Jane felt okay proceeding with the preservation plan, just considering the Rumpke side of the stone wall fence, because we think there are going to be a lot of challenges and hurdles trying to deal with the other side of the wall. And Danielle, correct, feel free to chime in on this, but I believe everyone was in consensus that it's not Rumpke's responsibility to potentially pay for vegetation removal or, really do much on the south side of the wall. One, it's not our property, and the stone wall pretty much splits the property line for the majority of it. And just being a good neighbor and fair about everything, at least I heard from Jane multiple times that she supports just dealing with the north side of the wall on the Rumpke side, to which we're going to have access to. And I'm not sure what more we can do as far as the southern property is concerned. I just wanted to bring that up now, because when we're pursuing Ecologic and some other, contractors, consultants, we're going to focus on our side of the wall, what we have control over, because I'm fearful the southern side of the wall could add some more timeline hurdles, and that property owner may not be willing to participate, but I don't want to speak for them. I just wanted to make everyone on this meeting aware of that situation. So that's all I have to say on it. Danielle, if you want to add anything, but I wanted to bring that up now.
No, I'm glad you did, because that's true. We talked about that extensively. As I mentioned early on, it was difficult for Rumpke to actually track down the property owner, because the GIS gives an address for her that she does not live at that address. And actually it was Tammy Cassidy. I reached out to her to, hey, do you happen to know this person? Particularly since her last name was Ellis, apparently growing up. Tammy did not know her, but she quickly found an address for her. And I believe the woman lives in Pendleton, Indiana. So yes, I mean, it is another situation. Anyone obviously who has an adjoining property owner, you have those kinds of issues. So that is something else to keep in mind, that, that we do have that adjacent property owner, and not necessarily any stipulations on them. And that side of the wall is barbed wire. Right up against the stone wall is a full length of barbed wire. So even if you wanted to get over there, you'd have to deal with that right away. The deer found one place where they can get through. So that is the other, Kevin's correct, something else to keep in mind. So anyone have, I mean, we could be very formal with this if you'd like. I'm happy to do that. We could go through, and maybe that's the best way to do it. I've tried to do that with COAs. And maybe that's a good way to do it, but go through board member by board member, just to make sure everybody has the ability to ask questions or make comments.
I might like to go ahead and preemptively just say a little bit about the process.
Okay. and I
That's
was gonna
okay.
say, sure, that's fine.
Sure. So this condition is associated with a conditional use permit, and staff was talking today. This is not particularly my project, but Drew Myers and Jackie Nestor-Jelen, who've been kind of overseeing the site plan review. We see this as a use kind of condition. And so a lot of it will be tied to the land use certificate. The land use certificate is usually issued once we have a full site plan approval and all of that site plan has been implemented. So we see that a phased kind of process makes sense, and that, and then with the final step of, we would not issue the land use certificate, which is required before you get occupancy for any buildings, as long as, all that condition is met. And I think I had thrown up on here some, Jackie had weighed in on this, and she was thinking that this would really be good for us to have a document with those phases formally drawn out, with a good plan to have, like she says, some milestones to getting it completed, that can be put on the next HP agenda and be formally voted on to see if this seems to meet the gist of the condition up here. I'll also just state that there's concerns that this might be the holdup, and I will just want to really quickly, we still have all of the drainage engineer, highway engineer has some portions to approve. So there are still steps that are kind of just not getting through very quickly. The drainage review, there's some kind of, I think, details that are still being worked out on that end. And so, if the board feels like this document would be put together quickly enough that we could have a special meeting, I could put that together, but knowing how planning works and how review of things goes, I think it could be adequate that this waits until the next meeting as well, as long as there's a nice, solid, formal document to vote on, and it'll have then proper legal notice and everything. Okay.
Okay, and so that's good information, I think, for Kevin to hear, if hopefully that all makes sense, because our next meeting in January and February, we have to shift our meeting dates because of holidays. So our next meeting would be in February on the 28th, on the last day of the month. So that's something else to keep in mind in terms of time frame, if we need to do a special meeting, or if there's enough time between now and the end of February, to get that sort of information worked out. And I do know, one thing I'll throw out, another piece of information or an even question, Tammy, when you brought up drainage all of that sort of thing. And that's another thing. I know that Kevin and Jane and I talked about a lot. At that point, Cheryl had to, we lost her. But there are some drainage issues with the site affecting the wall, and it's not, it's a lot of it's coming from the adjacent farm field to the west. But there's their own drainage issues of just how to protect the wall, as well as some culverts and things like that that are already on site that I know Jane and Kevin were talking about too. So I think, Kevin, part of your drainage plan may also need to include Jane's input on what's best for the wall. Is that correct in my understanding?
Jane and I have discussed some of that, and we've done some screen shares and looking at it. So, because just to educate everyone on that, you know, we're looking at what we call the pre-existing conditions of the site, and it's the existing stuff before we've gotten there. Appears like it's impacted the wall. I know in that really low swampy area, Danielle, I think I remember Jane commenting that it could be a candidate for removing a section to preserve other sections that have either collapsed or are needing like restoration. That may have to be explored further. I remember her commenting on that. I think with Rumpke getting on site, we're going to do everything we can to either hold the same or make better the situation with a reasonable means, just because this is our site now, and there are definitely some issues in those areas. And you know, hopefully our new design will address some of those as it stands. But I'll definitely talk with Jane more about that.
Okay. And Tammy, my question for you, just because you are our planning staff person, but if you need to shoot this back to Drew or Jackie or anyone else, Jane has asked the question, and it was discussed again as we were walking, where can she access, how can she access the information for that site when the current disturbances were made? She's interested in seeing previous approvals, drainage plans, and that sort of thing. And I don't know, and completely understand, you know, her reasoning. The topo maps I sent her were not sufficient. I did connect with, I sent an email to Polly in case any kind of, you know, in case her office had any kind of information, but Jane was interested in accessing planning documents for previous work. So if that's something that you can make a note of.
Drew Myers.
Okay.
He's the one who's doing the main review of this, and if that's a step that he needs to research in order to keep this going, that's who she would need to reach out to.
Okay,
Drew.
okay.
Now,
All
whether
right.
we've got good documentation or not, that's another thing. You know, digital files didn't start until about 2005.
Right. And I told her, I said, I had no idea when all of that took place.
Yeah. And the drainage board might have something as well, but I'm not sure. Because there is some kind of like detention pond, I think, in that corner.
Well, and that's kind of what we're encountering is a little bit of what I would call the requirements at the time that were not kept up with. And so, you know, the earth is doing what it wants to with the land at this point. So yeah, there's definitely what we figured was a retention pond, and then there's just been all kinds of other things happening since then. So, okay. So everybody's had all kinds of information here on this. Any questions from the board members? Anyone have any questions or comments? Kevin, this is typically a fairly informal board of ours, but so I'm just opening up to the rest of the board members to anyone want to jump in?
I'll jump in my hoodie and under a blanket, being about as informal as I can be. Um, so, when we're talking about phases of potential things, talking to Tammy, Danielle, Kevin, does it look like there's phases that logically line up as far as what things could be completed in order for which approvals to happen? Or is there any sort of like time conflict or bottleneck that needs to be addressed?
I'm going to let Kevin potentially, I think Kevin might have an answer for that one, or
Okay.
might have some ideas on that
Well,
one.
Devin, I'm going to answer your question with a question, unfortunately, to start.
I'm a teacher. I
So
can
what I've
handle it.
heard, okay. Well, what I've heard so far, and it seems very reasonable, is by your next meeting on February 21st, we would have a document with phases or a timeline or a milestone, something formal to document and for all you to vote on and make a decision, right? And that's like a first step, correct? Is that what I'm hearing, that what we want to work toward by the next meeting?
February 28th,
February 28th, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The holiday, yeah.
right? We have to push it a week later.
Let me interrupt here. I was wondering about the 21st versus the 28th, and the county side says 21st, but it doesn't look like the county's observing President's Day. And that's also the date that Tammy brought over to the agenda. So anyway, just to muddy the waters,
Ah,
it's not clear whether it's the 21st or 28th. I looked into this when we first got the calendar, and I put the 21st on my calendar. So anyway.
I have the 21st on mine as well. Like that is the approved calendar. So I'll have to look into that further.
yeah, because every other year we've always had the
Double
these
skip.
months we've always had to push back a week.
Was there a county adoption of like a spring holiday in lieu of President's Day or something?
We have a county holiday. Give me just a moment. No, there is no county
Okay.
holiday. In
I just wasn't sure
February.
if somewhere in the shuffle in the math it got
Yeah, we don't have a county holiday until like
okay.
April
So
15th.
anyway, so there will be it
April.
seems like everybody agrees that by the next meeting there will be a phased, logical, these are what things need to happen by this date for approval to happen.
Yeah. And Kevin, probably if you want to have that reviewed by Drew and Jackie and myself ahead of time, so we make sure that planning make sure that the document kind of makes sense. We can do a couple of, review the draft and see if we see any, holes in it or something first.
I think that seems reasonable with us meeting EcoLogic this coming Friday. We also need to get some timeline information back from Jane and Russell on what's realistic for them, but I think we can have a good draft pulled together prior to the 21st or the 28th, whichever date it ends up being. So kind of continuing along with my question there, we get to that point, we have this document that Tammy, you, Jackie, and Drew are good with, and y'all talk about, and the board's essentially going to vote on it at that meeting, correct? And it would either pass or not pass. Is that kind of how that process would be handled?
Or
I guess-
possibly amend it as needed.
Okay,
If there's
okay.
something that needs to be amended, then a vote. Mhm.
Okay, so at that point in time, I guess going back to Devin's timeline questions and how things match up, what is our approval process from there? Because I'm focused on the site plan approval because that's required before we can, like the site plan is needed for the right-of-way permit, if I'm not mistaken. And then the grading permit requires an approved driveway permit. And then so it's kind of this sequential step, right?
Yeah.
I want to better understand, we get to this next meeting, we've prepared this document that's been requested and it moves forward either as is or an amended version of it. I just want to understand our timeline, right? Because
I would,
Site plan.
this would be the box that planning staff would check off and hit complete. It would turn green. And then you would still be waiting for these blue ones to get done. Also
Okay.
waiting for some of these final two right here to kind of get worked out in the very end. So we just try to go get every step turned green, and this one is the one right here.
So that step would be checked off by having this next meeting and reviewing that timeline,
Yeah.
making sure it's acceptable to everyone. Okay.
Possibly as early as February 22nd, I would say.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense to me. So Devin, then back to you and the timeline question. If we go down that route, because I'm also working on those other items, the MS4 item we're close on. I've responded to Kelsey, the MS4 coordinator. And then we also have an item related to our passing blister design. And I'm just waiting on kind of a check from Paul Satterley over there that they're okay with our design, because we have to upload this written commitment. So that's some of those other check boxes are parallel tracks. We're viewing the wall, I think, as a parallel to our construction project. I mean, we get with Ecologic and one other, we're gonna review those, schedule, and keep that process moving, I would say, as fast as feasible. It might be limited by Dry Stone Conservancy's schedule. Jane has indicated to me that after her and Russell complete their comprehensive pre-existing survey, they can generally pull their final plan recommendations in as soon as up to 2 weeks. So I think once, a milestone for us is having Jane and Russell on site. And then, maybe we say 2 to 4 weeks after that date, you should see a plan pending, things happen, right? Personal,
Right.
professional, otherwise, and kind of back it up from there. I don't anticipate having like our contractor on site to be doing this kind of work. I mean, it's a parallel track, and frankly don't think we can wait for that. We just want to keep this process moving and see what's realistic to get accomplished this year. Devin, does that kind of answer your question? I think there's some back and forth, so we can really
No,
nail down.
I think it does. I just wanted to make sure that as far as that it looked like there was a smooth path, because it sounded like, initially there'd be a lot of hurdles to jump over and maybe a challenging or unrealistic time frame. So I wanted to make sure that we were all looking at it the same way.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I do.
Duncan?
Regarding I'm pretty clear now I'm looking at these suggested phases on the page that's up, and I pretty much see how that seems from this discussion. Seems like that can happen. And I'm all in favor of expediting this for Rumpke, but I'm a little concerned about, or I want to caution about the clearing part. In normal construction, if we have historic artifacts, we usually take some means to protect the artifact itself. And I know, I'm just from looking at the photograph, the aerials, and from my own experience clearing invasives and things in these kinds of situations, the clearing itself is a pretty rough and tumble process. And I just want to caution, and I've worked with Ecologic specifically on these kinds of projects, but I just want to caution that the methodology for clearing can really have a big effect on, for one, the existing condition of the wall, and two, the ability to actually do repairs that are meaningful down the line. So my experience has been that they like to come in and basically sort of chew everything up first, as much as they can, and then either pull things out or then poison them. And in particular, pulling things out in this instance seems to me that might be a little difficult without doing damage to the wall, especially if these are invasive plants, which are deep and widely rooted. So the clearing part adds another consideration for the protection of the wall. as I might add, does any kind of construction on the site prior to the wall being stabilized. So I just mentioning this to make sure that when you talk to Ecologic, Kevin, you make clear to them that they have to do this in a way that doesn't damage the wall. And I hate to say this, but my own experience in this was doing it by hand, which was no fun. So I just, I wonder if they've said anything to you about this, or if everybody's on the same page about this.
No, Duncan, that's a good point. That's why we're going to spend some decent time with them on site, looking at our particular portion of the wall. One thing I'll comment, when we were with Jane, she thinks that this phase, right, for some of the larger trees, we're not going to bring down more than are necessary, because that could also potentially impact the wall. I think if there are any type of branches overhead, we're going to be selective, and she did not recommend removing everything that's there right now, particularly if it could disturb the wall. I think it's a lot of the undergrowth and things that visibly impact it. So there could definitely be some options for not having to remove the entirety of the vegetation, at least at this stage. It's more to give her a clear line of sight for photo documentation, so we understand what the pre-existing condition is. But I will definitely stress to Ecologic on preserving the wall while they do any kind of the removal procedures, and what means and methods need to be considered. I was wondering, can you expand it at all anymore? I mean, did Ecologic in general do a good job for you guys and other sites, and did preserve the condition, or are there some caution there as well, and things to keep in mind?
I've mostly worked with them as consultants. So I've gone to them and asked them, to look at a site and make recommendations for clearance. And then I've taken their advice as opposed to have them do it. Although a neighbor on a site that I'm talking about did, I think, actually use them. And part of that was to use these, I don't even remember what this machine is called, but it just comes in with a big tumbler and just basically cuts everything off at the ground, including fairly large trees.
Duncan, it's called a FECON.
Okay.
They used it at the Hinklegarten Farmstead.
Yeah. Okay. So to the extent that was in an area where even just significant trees could be damaged, we had to restrict how close that machine was going to be allowed to get to anything. And usually we kept it away, I'd say on an average of 6 feet. And if anything looked like it was going to fall as a result of the use of that machine, we didn't let that machine work in that particular location, which meant that we had to go in with chainsaws, cut stuff down by hand and drag it out by hand, and often trim it down rather carefully, which was, as you can imagine, is rather time consuming. Ecologic recommended that once we got everything to grade, we poison it if it was invasive. And that's what we did. That was their procedure. But I totally respect their capacity to do it, and also their knowledge about how to do it correctly. Of course, they're mostly interested in making the clearance permanent when it comes to invasives. So the only way to keep them from coming back is either to completely uproot them or poison them, which can be kind of harsh on the environment. But they have a very particular way of doing it, which I think is pretty safe.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll definitely look forward to meeting them in person and emphasizing those concerns. And I'd say as part of this document we provide, we can even include some of their proposed methodology. And the reality is, Spencer has already indicated to me they have availability to pursue this project early on. So there's a strong possibility after we meet with them, they prepare their proposal, that they could start performing this work prior to the next board meeting. And if that's the case, I'll definitely be sure to pass along to Danielle and others here, how they're proposing it. You speak very highly of them, so I'm sure their means and methods and what will all be in their proposal, and just make sure everyone's on the same page with expectations.
It occurs to me that they might want a phase clearance as well, because if what you're hearing from the Conservancy is that they don't need 100% clearance, they just need line of sight, still in anticipation of ultimate repair to the wall, there's going to have to be more significant clearing than just line of sight. So maybe Ecologic has a phased approach as well, where they would do just enough for the survey and then come in later to actually accomplish enough to allow repair, which at that point would probably include both sides of the wall. Just thought, assuming that the ultimate goal here is to repair the wall and stabilize it for the future.
Debbie, do you have a question or comment? I see your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Meyer, thank you. I appreciate everything you and Rumpke are doing. Danielle, Jane and Russell, who I haven't met, Duncan, Cheryl Munson, and the planning. I'm very, very grateful because this wall is important to me. Like Duncan, I've been sitting here listening and concerned about when the vegetation is removed, because I have personally seen situations where you have old trees, lots of growth, and a lot of times that is holding the wall up. And so I think the removal has to be done very, very carefully. That being said, for this project and future projects, future wall projects in Monroe County, I'm not quite sure about, I heard that the neighboring property, that some of the stone wall goes in line with the property line, but some of it does not. And I heard the barbed wire fence that was probably for livestock some time ago. I'm not sure that I understand how stable the wall will be if the adjoining neighbor or neighbors, again, this project or future projects, are not involved. That being said, I heard loud and clear, everyone was trying to locate the owner and all, but how will that be addressed for truly stabilizing the wall? That's number one. Two, we're talking about a lot of money to put this wall back in good shape. This isn't a woven wire. This isn't barbed wire. It's not wooden, and even those fences are expensive. So how will the adjoining neighbor or neighbors, this project or other projects, how's that going to come into play, please?
Kevin, let me jump in here with a couple comments. Again, based on this, the length of time that we all spend out there chatting and such. Obviously, when you have an adjoining property owner, you do have issues, and that is the case with any of the walls in this county that we want to hopefully survey and protect. You're going to have, potentially two property owners, and some may want to be involved and some may not. So it is something to keep in mind. This is, as I told Jane and Kevin, this is the first project like this that, our board has really tackled in this regard. One of the points that you might see here, and that I will just kind of bring up, is that this is what is being requested of Rumpke that they're hiring Drystone Conservancy to do is a preservation plan. It's not a restoration plan. So in the historic preservation field, we have those different terminologies. Preservation is how you keep a resource as it is now. You're not restoring it, you're not rehabilitating it, you're not reconstructing it, but you're keeping it preserved so that it doesn't further deteriorate. And that is essentially what we're asking Rumpke to provide, is a plan for how to preserve this wall. Out of that, some of our discussions included, for instance, MC Iris is a local organization that does invasive plant removal. Potentially having them come in and use that site for their weed wrangles, they call them, where they go in as volunteers and they, remove invasive plants, things like that. That could become a project site that uses people in the community as volunteers. It's an educational tool, as well as Drystone Conservancy using that property and that wall for future workshops to actually then do the restoration components. So in other words, much like we were trying to do at the Stip Bender Farm before the pandemic stopped it, they would be coming in and looking at sections of the wall. What do we want to do to actually do restoration on? And that is how the wall could potentially be restored, those areas that need it. There's some sections that are perfectly fine, that they don't need any kind of work. But with some of these walls, it is what it is. You're not necessarily going to be able to build every single one back to the way it once was. So that's where we are now with this, is getting that basic preservation plan, is what will it take to keep it from further deteriorating and keep it in good shape. And that, as Jane said, you're getting the vegetation out, you're getting the drainage issues taken care of, because there are some sections that are being undermined by water from the adjacent farm field particularly, but also maybe from some of what was done before previous disturbance. So that's what her preservation plan will really tackle. How do we stop this from deteriorating? And then in time, go through the restoration part. Hopefully that answers some of that concern that you have, but feel free to ask more questions.
Thank you. Danielle, thank you. That helps a lot. But even with what I heard, which is wonderful, again, for this project as well as future projects, how do we address neighbors and adjoining neighbors, whether it's plural or single? If something needs to be done, Jane, Russell, do we just ask them and hope that they'll participate? What if they don't?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a good question that this board has not had to tackle. We have had discussions about, do we want to locally designate every wall in this county? And what kind of headache would that entail? That is when you have the ability to tell people that they have to take care of something. So it's a question I think that this board needs to be thinking of, but I don't think that we have an answer for it right now. I'm open to anyone else on the board commenting on it though. But it is something that certainly came up with this. If the wall was entirely on Rumpke's land, if the other property line went 30 feet in the other direction or something, we wouldn't have that concern. But we do have that concern. So, and we don't have a lot of, to date, there's not been a lot of communication with that property owner. I mean, as far as what's being planned and, any expectations or anything like that. So this is it's a topic for this board to be thinking about.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments or questions about any of the above?
I guess only if Kevin thinks he needs additional direction in terms of what we seem to have some consensus on that a phased plan is going to be the way to go, and it's pretty much outlined in the document that Tammy had up, and unless he needs some more direction about what that needs to look like before it gets to us, so that we don't have to spend an enormous amount of time a month from now going back and doing it again, or So I guess the question's for Kevin. Is he clear?
Yeah, Kevin, are you done?
Crystal clear.
Okay.
Crystal clear in what we're doing. And if I do have some questions or how you might be looking at the formatting, I jotted down. I'll reach out to Drew, Jackie, and Tammy and have them review at least the draft I pulled together in advance of this meeting, just to make sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's on it. It'll satisfy what you all be looking for, but I'm clear on what we got to do. We're good.
Okay. Awesome. Anyone else have any last comments or questions before we remove ourselves from this topic? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for attending the meeting, and we will talk soon.
Thank you all. Really appreciate you allowing us to participate, and look forward to our next meeting.
Great. Okay. So we have new business. We have election of officers. We have Smithville signage. We have this rezone. We have the Leroy Mayfield home, and we have the work plan. And we have Tammy for only 20 more minutes. Is that correct, Tammy? I'm fine to go in order. I'm also fine to move the election towards the end if we want to get through some of this other information that Tammy might want to take direct notes from.
I personally would prioritize item C as maybe one to have Tammy present for, because I feel like if we're going to be on our own, the other ones we can probably be on our own for. And I feel like, especially with the bold lettering, that it might be something that's quite time sensitive that we need to be mindful of.
I agree with having Tammy present for the discussion on this one, simply because it is something that she's brought to us as an FYI. So so we'll tweak the agenda order a little bit and move to the Hinkle rezone case.
I can do a quick presentation. So this is a rezone to go from Ag RR to general business. Basically, Lindeman and Associates Psychological Services is wanting to build some offices there next to the, I think it's Riley Hospital Children's kind of medical facility right there in the same area at that intersection of Arlington and West State Road 46. So this is the location of it. It's 2 parcels at 4833 West Arlington Road. When I pull up their report card, these numbers stood out to me. And then when I was on the site, these are the 2 lots here, and we have good support that we will probably have this rezone go through just because the nature of the area and what they want to do kind of seems to fit. But, being on the site, I just was going to point out this did not make it into either the shard or the interim report. The interim report used old addresses, and they do make a old State Road 46 reference. It's not this house. It's almost on the township line. But there were these seemed a little more modern structures, but then there is this one that might have been an old house, according to the property report card. And then there's also this barn here that I've added in a couple of other photos of. That's, I think, the house, like little structure. And I was standing in front of the barn. This is the barn itself. And I am not an expert, but I didn't want to pass the opportunity up to perhaps have some more professional eyes look at that site. So this is the aerial photography, and I think there's the house and here's the barn. And I do want to note that these two structures, I think, were the ones that I was more concerned about. But the plan that Spring Point has, they have their letter in here, but they've got a preliminary site plan that they just were using, and they do have right now like kind of this existing building, that barn is kind of popped out as a preservation, though the other little like house thing is not included. But I just thought, should the board be interested, this would be an opportunity to perhaps get a set of eyes out there to assess it, to see if any conditions of approval to go with this rezone might be, warranted. I mean, Julie Thomas is obviously going to be weighing in on this, and she has in the past pointed out things in the middle of rezones where we've had to backtrack, bring things here. So that's why I'm just kind of preemptively thinking maybe, but maybe nothing. So any questions?
Tammy, I think it's something personally. I'm just going to point out to our board that this is exactly why we've talked about wanting demolition delay, because this is what it's all about. We don't have it yet, so we don't have a lot of leg to stand on in that regard necessarily. But when I was looking at the 1989 survey, I was seeing that 27 in Richland Township was probably this property. The maps in that survey were not necessarily always completely accurate. I've found in my own work. It does list it as, just the bungalow. There's no outbuildings listed, but that's not unusual because a lot of the listings did not include all of the outbuildings that may have been on a site. I tried to reach out to DHPA. Don Hall and Duncan heard my lamenting about this the other day, to find out, is this yet another item, another resource missing from SHARD? And I don't yet have an answer from them, a response from them. I'm happy to get some, I'm sorry.
Could we scroll back to the pictures of the house, the bungalow itself? Because
Yeah.
I'm on the on my phone looking at the
And I'm gonna say,
Yeah.
this is the bungalow that I thought they were referring to in the interim report is this one, but I could be wrong.
It's, without driving out there, it's hard to say exactly.
But the location for this one seemed like this was referring to the house rather than that one.
yeah, because that one I think still has like original windows and I don't know.
You
if it's
might be
still-
correct, because
inside.
actually the address is correct. So it may not be a missed property from the interim. It was missed in the interim report, in other words, but which is sad, but it also may not have been as visible back then, because that has happened a lot too. If something wasn't visible, you couldn't survey it, having been a surveyor. One thing I was going to suggest, and I'm open to debate, is that little building looks to me like it could have been a school building, either moved to that site and reused as storage, because that often happened when school buildings were no longer used.
Yeah, because there's a door
but
there.
Exactly, which is why I said that it's very symmetrical in that center door and, just that little kind of township school. The other thing I wanted to point out about this is the plat name. It's King and Stanger Baby Farm. And it was platted as that. King and Stanger are both very longtime Monroe County names. We still have the Stangers around for sure. And baby farm might sound weird. But I came across this, and darn if I can't find it now. I came across this terminology when I was researching something else many years ago. Where a baby farm, they were calling these things baby farms when they were back in the 30s, with the idea of getting more average folks into farming for more subsistence, Depression era, that sort of thing. And they were calling them baby farm as in small, tiny, not your bigger agricultural type of establishment. And I found it really interesting that this was platted specifically with that name. And I just today received a message through the Indiana Barn Foundation. I have not yet answered this gal, where she's wanting to research a barn that they have that was called a Farm Bureau barn. So I feel like there's this, there's something out there where that in that era, there was a movement to get people back to the land, if you will. And I just wanted to throw out all this information for everybody's FYI. And that's just what I saw. My initial gut feelings on this is it's a great little bungalow, and it's got some great outbuildings, and it potentially has some great history. And it's really sad to lose it all.
So Tammy, what exactly is being proposed for demolition? The small 2 sheds and the house?
Technically, we don't, make sure I'm not muted. I mean, this is a rezone, so they're technically just providing a sketch drawing of an idea. This is the second idea that I've seen. And they have some environmental constraints. These are steep slopes through here. There's a pond here, and this is kind of as a future phase. These two, well, this is a future phase for another building. And there's an oak grove kind of right in here that's kind of pleasant. Actually, it might be here. And so there is some buildable area in other parts of this lot, but they do have some environmental constraints. And it's hard to say if this driveway would even be approved. There's not been a commercial driveway permit approved for the site yet. So it's hard to say if it'll get shifted or not. I don't know.
But
It's-
it looks like this plan, it's really hard to tell because there's a kind of there's a dark outline around an obviously new building, and then there's
Mhm.
something to the left of it, which is where the left front of it, which is where the house is now. So I
So
can't
here's
tell.
the house.
Sorry, do you
This
know?
is the main house here. This, I believe, is that smaller school building, little house, with the doorway that faces this way, I believe.
Right.
And that's the existing barn. Because I did stand down here and I got a photo like this. And then the 2 other outbuildings are like the 2 sheds are up here.
So this plan at least proposes the removal of the house and those 2 small buildings.
3, technically, I think.
The
There's
barn as
2
well?
There's 2 up here. There's this little house thing here. The barn, no, they say it's an existing building and there's a square around it. Not sure exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Petitioner from Spring Point Architecture is here. If you wanted to hear from her at all, she's been kind of seeing this petition through. I think you could upgrade her as a panelist. Dawn
That-
Gray.
I didn't see Dawn here.
Yeah,
Dawn she's
I don't see her name.
still as an attendee, so she would have to get
Oh.
upgraded to a panelist. And I'm not sure if I don't know if Jonathan Stewart is available to do that.
Okay. Well, I
Donna-
think you answered my question anyway.
I don't have the power to upgrade anyone to panelist. Only Jonathan Stewart does. And so Jonathan, if you can hear me, please promote Dawn to panelist. Or raise your hand, and that might help. Sometimes raising the hand, I don't know, you may not.
Dawn is at least trying to answer questions by
Thank you.
chat. She says the intent is to keep the existing barn structure.
Up to right now, I'm in the middle of. a meeting.
I mean, that answers that immediate question, is to keep the existing barn structure. I don't know what the intent, obviously, we don't know what the future plans would be, whether or not it would be. I mean, it's preserving a barn. It's not preserving the barn with its context of a farm. So that it is unfortunate in that sense. And then it is a barn that's just back in the woods behind a parking lot.
So just to kind of let you know that this is going to go to be the packet for the Plan Commission admin session is released tomorrow. And we could include an update from the board within the staff report. And then 2 weeks from, let's see, I think it is March. Nope, sorry. The February 15th, that would be the date that it goes to Plan Commission for a recommendation. And it's possible they might get the recommendation to then take it to the commissioners for approval. So I just was wanting to put the timeline out there that, this would be the time to, if you wanted to put a condition with it, that is a possibility at this point in time. It's not, it might keep going through and might be approved by February 15th, and there may not be a second chance to hear this. I saw Susan Snyder put something in the chat. I don't think it has anything to do with this. She's just found out at the meeting.
Yeah.
Which I need to do also.
Well, Dawn is in the chat and says the intent is to keep the barn.
Right. Yeah.
Tammy?
Oh, hi, Dawn.
Hey, okay, I think I'm at least
Been promoted.
I've been promoted.
Does anyone have any comments or questions for Dawn? We're going to lose Tammy here in a minute, but if nothing else, we can, she will be able to listen to the minutes or to the meeting and take minutes from that. But does anyone have any questions for Dawn as the architect?
I suppose my question would be, as far as looking at the other structures on the property, aside from the barn, what's the intended time frame from now until like demolition would happen?
The hope is that the rezone will go through in February, and then construction would start later this spring, early summer. So meaning then demolition would be in the spring.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm going to be bowing out. And if you would like to ask for someone to be a co-chair or to be able to share screen, if someone else wants to share screen to share the packet, someone who's a little tech savvy might want to ask to see if Jonathan Stewart would allow you to share screen. So, because my visuals are going to go by. All right.
Okay.
Sorry. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for.
And just
letting me go.
one quick clarification, if we want to place conditions, we need to do that tonight, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Tammy. Is there anyone else that has any questions for Dawn? No.
I guess this isn't just for Dawn, but
Or comments in general, comments about the whole project? Yeah.
I can't really tell how far along this all is in terms of approvals, but it doesn't seem like there's going to be any saving to that house, but it seems like we might want to take a look at those other structures in order to try to determine, as Tammy suggested, what their historic value is. Because if they wouldn't be that hard to move, for one thing. And we might have some suggestions to make about the barn. I don't really know what kind of conditions are appropriate at this point, or I'd state one.
Yeah, well, and that's I'm possibly a little bit more optimistic about the house than maybe you are, Duncan, as far as possibility of moving. Since
Yeah, I
the
didn't
bunk-
mean to exclude it from being moved. I just meant,
yeah,
it looks to me
yeah.
like this project's
being
probably.
saved on site. Yeah. Yeah, like I don't know if there's a good condition that would be, allowing us to at least analyze or document the structures within a certain time frame. I don't know.
I would propose that could be a condition. As like Tammy said, and it is in the packet for this part of the packet. Like she said, it has the preliminary hearing of February 15th. They're asking to waive the final hearing, but that could be part of the condition is giving the board sufficient time to document the structures, look at the structures, examine other outlets, which would effectively be then that would be that would give us until a final hearing in March 22nd. So that could be a condition, as I would understand it, that we effectively be given that time.
I mean, we could certainly look at those structures before February 15th.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Problem. Probably do it before February 1st. So, I mean, I don't know I just don't know how to put that. I just think it'd be worth our while to have a look. I'm not sure we're going to find anything. I mean, obviously your comments, Danielle, about the significance of the farmstead itself, short of moving to designate the whole site and just, nullify this proposal 100%. I don't know what other strategy there would be except to try to move those buildings away, at which point the historic significance of the site's gone.
Right.
So I don't personally feel motivated to suggest that we designate it, but I'm not the only member of the board. But
Any other thoughts or comments?
I do think it's important that we see them and have access to them.
I guess I have another question if Don happens to know the answer in this discussion. So on the keeping of the barn structure, is there a future plan in place for what use that would have on the property?
Not at this time, or not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions for Dawn or comments in general as a board about this site or the discussion so far?
I guess I would just, if we're talking about conditions, I would just suggest that maybe we make a condition that, a couple of us be allowed to look at the site with ample time before February 15th in order to just evaluate the historic integrity of it.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever purpose. I mean, there could be a lot of different purposes, but I think it's definitely worth having a look.
Right.
And I think that's why it was brought to us in the first place. So
Yeah. I like that condition.
So I'll propose that to be the condition.
Okay.
We need a second.
I'll second.
And Tammy will be able to get that information on the voting. But what I will go ahead and do is one more call for comments or questions before we vote.
Do you have anything to add, Dawn?
No, not really. Just that, we weren't aware, and it doesn't appear that there's any historical designation or status to this at this time. So, that,
No, there's
but-
no, there is no designation at this time.
okay. But we're happy to, have you all look at it and have this discussion for sure.
Is the property empty or is somebody living there?
No, it is occupied. The house is occupied. So, and the applicant for the rezone is not the current property owner. So, if, and when you do want to go out, I just, the person in the house is not the applicant.
And the house is for,
Right.
so the property's for sale.
Correct.
Okay. So we might need a realtor to go with us or something.
Maybe, and I can definitely give Tammy all that information if she doesn't already have it, to make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have the proposed kind of it somewhat of a conditions of approval here. Although we're talking about doing this before the next meeting, we're trying to get this accomplished, but that the board be able to examine and document the site, the structures on the site, and report back to the Plan Commission on that. I will call the roll or let's see, let me pull up my list. Duncan,
Yes.
Don Maxwell,
Yes.
Doug Wilson,
Yes.
Holly Sturgeon,
Yes.
Don Hall,
Yes.
Devin Blankenship,
Yes.
Debbie Reed,
Yes.
and Danielle Bashat Bell will vote yes. Okay. And
So
if
really,
Dawn,
if we could get this done fairly soon, and I'd be happy to participate, we could just make a report to the committee, before, because they always go to committee first.
right, exactly. Right. But we certainly, like Dawn said, get information to Tammy to help facilitate that. Okay. So next on the agenda, no, it's a long
Yes,
meeting.
thank you, Dawn.
Yes, thank you, Dawn, if you're still here. You may go now. Smithville signage request. We'll just go back to that one. I hopefully everybody saw that in the packet. That Smithville Area Association is asking for signage for 5 entry points into the community. And I think this sounds like Devon's area. Devon, do you have any thoughts or comments on this?
They finally got jealous of Sanders. I knew it was just a matter of time. Yeah, I probably need to dive more deeply into it. I have the form that can be filled out easily, to gather the historic information we need. One thing I guess this is our first meeting since the holidays. I got the nerdy index to maps the History Center had. And so now it's really easy for me to tell which communities are on which maps because they often have large sections of the map. So that helps support. I mean, we know Smithville's there. It's not too much of a tricky community, but anyway, I need to look more deeply in that. Is there a point person who I could send the form to?
In the packet that Tammy sent out, yes, there's
Okay, okay.
Patty Robertson is the president of Smithville Area Association, and she
Okay.
emailed Tammy, so her
Okay.
email is there as well as her phone number.
Okay, so what I'll do is here within the next week or so, I'll work with Tammy on making sure that I can get in touch with Patty to go through the process, and then we'll have that moving through the system. But yeah, I mean, that to me that sounds like a reasonable request, given our community signage efforts. Probably as long as there's does not conflict with Sanders, as long as they're not trying to overtake. Like put our sign on the other
Yeah.
side of Sanders.
And I would just say to keep in mind, again, back to, however many years now it's been since Julie Thomas said, yes, the commissioners still support the idea, but please come
Yeah.
back to us and say, let us know what you're
Yeah.
doing in
Right.
terms of funding. So
Right.
that would be the thing, whether or not Smithville, if there's any kind of funding issue, whether or not they
Right.
have funds.
Right. So yeah, so that'll be just a point of discussion. Yeah, but I think that sounds fine and reasonable, and I think that'll be a good opportunity to collaborate with them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So next up is the Leroy Mayfield home discussion. And there was a couple of, there was links in your packet to that discussion. This is a property, very historic property that is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and was actually brought to this board back when Nancy Hiller was on the board. Of great concern. At that point, I believe there was some talk of actually demolishing the house or moving it or something like that. And nothing was physically done to that property in that sense, but it has obviously deteriorated. So if you all clicked on those links, you'll see where there was discussion from Randy Richardson, who has been involved in doing a lot of genealogy and whatnot. She was contacting Gloria, the city HPC staff person. And obviously that's not in the Mayfield home is not in her jurisdiction. So she sent it to me and Duncan, I think, and whomever else. So Polly said she was in favor of putting it on the agenda to discuss the status of this property. And basically Randy was just saying, what can be done to keep it from deteriorating? So here we are with that on our plate as a discussion item. Does anyone have any thoughts or comments on this particular situation?
I recall this from the from its inception, not of the house, but of the situation. Because wasn't it that a crane company that had been displaced by I-69 on Vernal Pike had relocated to the property? Now, is it still the same crane company that owns it?
I don't know. I did not have time, honestly, to look into that kind of detail. If it's the same company that owns that property. But that I recall, yes, it was a business moving to that site, just basically to use the property.
Yeah. And they had no use for the house at all. And then I think from all that I remember, the biggest challenge with the house is, first of all, the ever important discussion of once it's moved from its site, it's no longer the same historic value, but then also gone, it's not the same historic value, so that's a challenge. But it's an L-shaped house, if I recall correctly, making it particularly challenging.
And there's also a cemetery that's associated with the property.
Oh yeah.
And I do know that this property goes back, that whole area has a lot of history, associated history in that Vernal Baptist Church and other properties that are out there. So yeah, moving this house just to save its architecture really does, one does not do it a whole lot of, it's a disservice in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 45 feet or 41 feet wide and 51 feet deep.
And what I will throw out to folks is just a kind of a reminder that this is, it was probably discussed back then, maybe not. This is another situation where this board has the ability to locally designate properties. And I know for a long time, there was it has a history of not designating a property unless a property owner comes to the board wanting it done. What that unfortunately means is that you have these kinds of situations where you have, essentially, there's not a whole lot you can do.
Right.
If the property were locally designated by this board, then we could be asking them to, make repairs, keep it in good shape, keep it from falling down, etc. So it's really kind of up to the board to decide what direction it wants to go in when it comes to properties like this. Because I would say you're going to see more and more of it over time.
Yeah, and I would also say my other takeaway from this type of situation is because we probably also still have the house that's behind Print Pack. It's probably
Right.
just sitting there still. Is when we do a National Register nomination, I don't know, obviously we're not, this is kind of that same conflict you're talking about. It's like, I don't necessarily want to strong arm people into doing a local designation, but really National Register designation does nothing in the way that we can protect it. It's like, well, we're protecting it from like I-69. Maybe, yeah. But I don't know.
The keeper of the National Register, one of them, in an interview that I listened to a few years back, it was an interview with several former keepers of the National Register. He stated that if local communities want to preserve their history, local designation is the strongest tool, not National Register listings. I mean,
Right.
that's coming from the keeper. So that's kind of where this board is kind of, you're charting the course of the future of the board in this way.
Right.
And so,
and I think the particularly hard thing with this house is that it's been allowed for other things to build up around it that that degrade the nature of the area or alter the nature of the area. Because the thing is like, okay, well, you wouldn't move it further down Ord Road because that's just all isn't it all quarry down there? And then you can't move it across the street because that's the airport. And so it becomes sort of out of context there. It does appear when I'm looking at this, this is slightly unorthodox, so just bear with me. When I'm looking at this overhead view of the house that I gave you the measurements from, it looks like there might be the original front 16 feet that we're able to see in the picture. And then that wing is about halfway. It looks like that back wing goes about 18 feet for original, and the rest of it is added on beyond that. So it may be able to, leave behind the newest fill-in parts and take the original structure plus the 18 feet of back wing. I mean, as far as moving it, but I don't know.
and of course, there is the question of who's going to move it, where's it going to be moved
Right.
to, what is the purpose of moving it as opposed to trying to preserve it on site. All
Exactly.
of those things. I think I probably have the original. Paul Diebold, who is with the HPA and oversees the National Register nominations for DHPA, actually did the nomination for this house, this property, like maybe 30, 35 years ago at this point. So I may actually have that original nomination. But I'd like to hear from some other board members on this.
Well, if you move it, you're going to lose the National Register status.
Exactly, there's that point. That's a very good point to make.
It'll be delisted. So you're not preserving, all you're really doing is saving the house for somebody who needs a house at that point. And I'm not saying that's not a good cause, because it is, but you're not doing anything for the history of the site by taking the house away. And my secret longing for this property has been that the current user will go away. We'll find another site and it's better suited, and somebody can reoccupy the house, because there's total neglect going on around the house. And they don't, as far as I know, they're not using it for anything unless they're storing something in it. So
That's probably the case.
this is a case of having, the wrong use for the site in terms of protecting the site. But I also shared your comment, Devin, that this is in the path of the airport. That runway eventually is going to come across the street. I can't imagine. The airport's gotten about as big as it can within the constraints that are there, and I can't believe it's not going to get bigger over time. So that's a real downside for living there. It's right in the flight path. So it may be that the farm usage is obsolete at this point in time, and that the crane company is a better use. So, I don't see how you solve that problem. If you locally designate it and get the county lawyers to enforce the guy to stop the demolition by neglect, still doesn't have a use for it. I mean, that's kind of poisonous to require somebody to do that when there's no real solution in the long run. So I don't, I know that's basically throwing up my hands, but this house is in the wrong location. And it's not that great a house. Maybe on the National Register for what I don't remember. I have read that nomination. It's been so long ago. Of course, I don't remember any of it. But it's not a terribly remarkable house in terms of historic structures.
Yeah, it says he was among one of the first settlers in Monroe County.
Mm-hmm.
Settlement farm.
Yeah.
It is circa 1830 was its construction. Yes.
So it's important in that regard, but
Yeah.
without somebody dwelling in it, or putting it to good use, I don't
Well, and to me, I think that the failures, part of it is also learning from our failures, our past failures on it. And I think the fact that the other things were allowed to develop around it uninhibited is a big issue, like when we think about things like Stip Bender Farm, limiting future development around it is going to be what ultimately, helps save it, or limiting the type of development around it. Whereas here we have basically one house on one side of a road that is surrounded by, airport, quarry,
recycling center.
Yeah.
It's a road to the gravel pit is what it is.
Right.
And how many trucks go down that road a day? Hundreds.
Yeah.
So who wants to live there? And I don't know if unless the crane company put a viably commercial use in the house, I just don't see any hope for it. And I don't believe they're using it. Pick your battles.
Holly, Debbie, Doug, Don, anybody else have any comments or thoughts, questions?
Just listening to Duncan, I just kind of got the idea that if you did locally designate it and require work, if the guy didn't really want the property that much, maybe he does sell it and move somewhere, and maybe you get somebody in there that would put the work in. But
Yeah, that's a hard thing to arrange, though.
Yeah.
I think it would be hard to find a buyer, if that even were to happen, it'd be hard to find a buyer. All as difficult as it is to sign up to take on a historic home, and then you're signing up to live around a quarry and an airport.
Yeah,
It's a tough sell.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Duncan's pragmatism. Sometimes, I hate to say this, but sometimes you just have to let things go. It doesn't seem viable to, as Polly said, even if you thought, oh, let's make it make a bed and breakfast out of it, you might want to let the guests know that hundreds of trucks are going to go by and there's an airport overhead, or maybe it could be converted into some kind of corporate or business office. But as far as a commercial use, I don't see much of a use for it.
Anyone else? Thoughts? Well, I mean, it is what it is. It is a little bit like what Devin alluded to is that, maybe ideally the board, many of you were not on it then, would have been a little bit more proactive a while back. And it's kind of like learning from the mistakes of the past or something like that. It is a bit of a lesson, I guess, in that way of when something comes across our radar, that you might not want to regret it later. So it's learning. So obviously, there's, I don't mind responding to Randy's request. I mean, it's been funneled down. I don't know that she even knows that we're talking about this at this point. I'm sure if I told her that, there's nothing we can do and we think it's a lost cause, she probably would not be happy. But then, it is not the first time.
Well, and I'm not sure this is the house to do it on, but it is sort of like what sort of public outcry for protection of a structure would we need for us to switch the way that we do things and to say, okay, we're going to locally designate it. Because what's our litmus, when we've never done that before, why do we go after this guy first and not somebody else who's doing something more heinous? Like, why don't, so.
Like the farm we just looked at, the little farm. I mean, that,
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, that's the part that gets me is like, and that's how I feel about the Mylison house too, is, we recommended to them that they do local designation and they didn't. And maybe the lesson to us is, well, too bad we're doing local designation. Thank you for bringing this house to our attention. Yes, we would like, but I don't want people to be scared to bring us a thing for a National Register nomination either. I don't know, my rural Monroe County, like, I hope the government leaves us alone side, has to battle with the like, oh, I hope the government protects us side. So
Yeah, people want it both ways, right?
I know. Well, that's the other thing too, in our education piece of it, trying to explain like, oh, if you want protection from crazy, projects, then the county will protect you. You just have to be ready to commit, on a certain level to the county's ways for the county to protect you. So,
Right.
and I don't know, I think our discussions of things like the stone walls and things like that, I think that is where we're making up for the regret that we could have had about these other things. But yeah, this person has owned the property since 2014, February 5th, 2014. And if I recall correctly, was displaced because of I-69 construction. And so it's sort of this ripple effect, why couldn't they have bought a totally vacant piece of land that didn't, have historically sensitive stuff on it? Well, nobody was there helping them with that. So I don't know.
Yeah, this business is not always easy, I tell you.
Yeah, like,
Historic buildings and animals, it's
yeah.
way it goes, but yeah, so well, any other last minute thoughts on this before we have I will call it probably brief discussion about the work plan, but we do need to discuss that one and then go into elections. We still are not done. This is gonna be a
Yeah.
long meeting.
Don't-
We can
don't
make
run
up
away
for
yet.
December.
I will say maybe something I would be a little bit more comfortable with, if we are going to start designate, if we do change our ways and start designating of our own volition and not with the property owner, I would feel much better if we did okay, here's our, top 10 most endangered list, and we're going to designate all 10 of those. I think I'd feel comfortable if it was part of a sweep versus if it was picking on one guy who never wanted the house to begin with.
I would agree with that theory or that idea I think that's a good idea to look at something like that, because I know I said to this board some time ago that I was going to try to bring the Samuel Harbison farm to this board, and I've not really had time to concentrate on it, but that one to me is very endangered, and it was bought by a property developer
Mhm.
who purposely allowed demolition by neglect. So, not even to reuse the property, it's not rented, it's not used in any way.
Yeah.
So to
And
me,
I think if we're going to change the way we do it, I feel like we need a lot of good reason behind it, because I feel like that's a bit of a culture shock since we haven't been that way before.
True.
One way to think about this, and I made it kind of a quip about choose your battles, but at the city, I've spearheaded several designations that went against the owners. It's never fun, and had to get up in front of city council and make the case several times. And each time we did make the case. And you're often pitched against people who are lying in public about what's true and what's not true, and you end up calling them liars and da 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 da. It's hard. I lost some clients, I'll put it that way. But and the other consideration, and I know these sites tend not to be as urban in the county as in the city, but the other consideration when going all the way like that, I think, is what are the ancillary benefits? I mean, and the example I think of is just east of the bus station on 3rd Street. There's a little row of buildings that are pretty old urban build out. And when the developers were looking at the bus station and prospects for a hotel for the convention center, which by the way, never happened, or it hasn't happened yet. That site was under the eyes to be acquired. And the person who owned the building in the middle of that block was anxious to sell because he saw the developers coming and he knew he could get a good price for it. I think that's a fair appraisal without putting words in his mouth. I mean, he wasn't a bad guy. He saw an opportunity. And we designated that building against his wishes and saved the whole block. And the bus station still got built, and there's still a big empty lot at 3rd Street and Walnut for a college for a hotel if it ever manifests. But that prospectus, if you will, was going to take that entire block and start down the next block and go south down Washington Street. And it stopped all of it. And it's all pretty much redeveloped or stabilized since then. So the benefit, I think there's been a lot of benefit, even though the fight was ugly and uncomfortable and, lost some friends. So I think in this case, you're not going to move the airport. You're not going to move the gravel pit. And the only thing you might do is get rid of the recycle center by moving it down the street. But so I don't see the ancillary benefit of fighting for this particular house. Even though I'm sorry, because if it's a settlement site, then it's important, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, I live on a settlement farm. I wouldn't give it up for anything. So, but there's more to protect here than there is there. I don't know. It's just a way of thinking about it. If you can broaden your view a little to what are we going to make happen here that would, or what do we stand to lose that we can protect? And there, all we're going to lose is one building that's already probably in pretty bad shape. So I don't want, all isn't the right word, but you know, pick your battles.
Mhm.
We will go up against some owners eventually. There's no question in my mind, because that's the nature of the game. But you don't want to do it frivolously.
Right. So we've got a couple more things to hammer through. We have the election of officers, chair and vice chair, and then we have our work plan to look at. Which one do we want to tackle first?
Let's do the officers, because we can do the work plan anytime.
Well, it's true.
And we're all tired.
I was going to give a quick update on, but I think we probably are already updated on just one more comment I was going to make on talking to Jane, but in the work plan. So the election of officers, chair and vice chair, as I have said to everyone the last month, I do need to step down from being chair. I've not really honestly gotten with Polly to discuss with her on her thoughts on being vice chair. She was not able to be at the last meeting, so we didn't get into a lot of this. So do we have anyone who is willing to step into the chair role? And second from that, Polly, where are you in your service, even as vice chair? Are you in a position to continue as vice chair? Are you in a position to be nominated as chair?
I would be comfortable staying in the position of vice chair, but I don't think that I have the time right now to devote to being chair, just with a little 2-year-old running around. But I'm also comfortable if we want to have a clean slate for both positions as well, whatever the board would like to decide.
Okay. So is there anyone willing to be nominated as chair?
Do I need to give my pep talk again?
And what I'm going to say is, I mean, I truly am going to step down. I mean, I'm not going to, like last year, it was like, okay, fine, I'll do it again. I'm not going to be able to do that again. And if we don't have a chair, it means that our staff person basically has to come to Polly as the only person to put agendas forward with any kind of issues, questions, etc. So it leaves our staff person without an immediate contact. So it's not just a question of like, well, who's going to run a meeting next month? We have other issues. So feel free to pep talk if you'd like to, Devin.
Yeah, I mean, I just as a reminder to everybody who has not been chair yet, I would throw everybody who's not been chair yet, or I would exempt Polly since she's willing to be vice chair. That essentially it's running meetings. That is the core, most basic thing that we need from a chair. Now the chair can miss from time to time. That's happened. So you know, if something comes up or, you know, you're ill or whatever, we're not going to have you chair from the hospital or anything. Though now we could too. And then each chair sort of brings their own element to it, depending on what their interests are and what their capabilities are. So, for example, Cheryl Munson and I were both very different chairs because Cheryl was often able to be on the ground places all over Monroe County at like 1:30 p.m. And that was never possible for me. That was not a common thing. You know, I can pull it off on a Saturday or Sunday, but I can't pull it off on a weekday. And so we were very different in our chair status. Also, there's always different stuff going on. So I can pretend that as somebody who was a past chair that it would be predictable, but like I was chair during our whole I-69 you know, section 106, where we had to painstakingly look at every single property and how noise would affect it and stuff like that. So luckily that's not in the forefront. I don't know if Duncan and Danielle could talk about things that were unique to their time that probably won't happen again. But really you do get to bring a lot of yourself into it in whatever capacity you would like. So I really like seeing the directions that we've gone, you know, over the years. I feel like we continue to pick up the pace with our projects and our commitment to education and outreach. And we have these really good, meaningful conversations about things like, you know, what do we do with a settler farmstead that has been neglected? I feel like we're all kind of at an elevated point in those conversations, and that's because of the expertise of board members and chairs and past chairs. So I'll finish off by saying, like, it's mainly the meetings, and you get to sort of make it your own thing with the support and adoration of a room full of other great, knowledgeable people.
I will just add that I think sometimes it can be intimidating for some, maybe because of, you know, if I or Duncan or Devin with his experience on the board, but, you know, jumping in and handling things, those things don't necessarily have to be handled by the chair. Some of these things are handled because when I've been chair, I've done it because I know how, or because I have that background. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that a chair is going to have to handle those things, like writing a section 106 letter or whatever. And so some of these things that we're already doing, you know, folks will continue doing. So like, again, like Devin has said, we really just need somebody who's willing to step in, be the chair, be that point of contact with our staff person, whoever that might be, to say, here's a proposed agenda, you know, what do you have anything to add? And then run the meetings and, you know, look to the rest of us for help with other things if needed. So that's really what's needed is somebody who's willing to just serve that role. So once again, do we have anyone who's willing to be nominated to do that? Anyone who's willing to step into this role? Because when you serve on a board, at some point you got to step up to do a little, you know, this sort of thing.
And none of us are going to let you fail miserably at it. So don't worry about that.
So Don Maxwell, if I nominated you, would you accept the nomination?
I would not.
All right.
The rationale for that would be is that I'm going up for promotion this year and that I have a book contract that is due in the spring semester. So I have two major things that I'm very concerned about.
Yeah, okay. I get it.
So I hear him saying next year.
You can interpret it that way. Yeah.
Well, you ran a couple of meetings as the vice and I thought you did a good job. So I wanted to put the screws to you at least momentarily.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah,
But we can't not have a chairman, so somebody's gonna have to step up.
And the unfortunate thing is that, I understand Polly's position, but if she is willing to be nominated as vice chair and no one is willing to be chair, then it does fall on her to run the meetings, as if the chair were absent.
I don't think we can do that. I think you have to have a chair and not a vice chair. I mean, anybody can stand in for somebody, but
I suppose, I'm just not sure how it would work. I don't know, I've not been in that situation before where there's a board or a commission that doesn't have a chair. So that's just my understanding.
I would then take it to our other remaining members to I'm going to put the ball in their court to ask questions that would resolve any discomfort that they would have about being chair.
So the remaining members would be Doug, Don Hall, and Debbie.
Yeah. So any questions that would help resolve your discomfort with the idea of being chair? Because in my view, all three of you are qualified. You're knowledgeable people. You show up. You ask good questions. You haven't been chair before.
I must respectfully decline. Heaven knows I'm not a lazy person, and I truly try to do my part, but I have so many obligations, and I still work full-time by choice, and it's a busy place where I work. And that and other obligations that I have, I just would be spread too thin. And so I'm sorry, but I must decline.
Okay, I finally got it unmuted. Guys, I am too lazy to do this job. I have retired. I'm still trustee and I got plenty to do with that. And I apologize, but I can't do it either.
Is anyone interested in vice chair? It's real easy, I'll tell you. You sign a couple documents and you're the backup.
I would do that for you, Polly, if you would take the chair.
Okay, well then, with everyone's heavy guidance, I will, if approved, I can nominate myself, I guess, for chair, and Doug for vice.
somebody to nominate you. Don't worry.
Okay, there we go.
I will nominate Polly for chair and Polly Sturgeon for chair and Doug Wilson for vice chair.
I second.
Okay. So then we will have to vote on this for Tammy's minutes.
We just consider that like a slate that we vote for them both at the same time.
I'm sorry.
Do we consider it a slate where we just vote for them at the same time, or?
I think so, in the interest of time, that we will say that the officers nominated for the 2022 year are Polly for chair and Doug for vice chair. And that was seconded by, I nominated, and we have a
I seconded.
seconded.
Yes.
So let's vote. I'm going to try to go through the list here. Polly,
Yes.
Don Maxwell,
Yes.
Doug Wilson,
Yes.
Debbie Reed,
Yes.
Don Hall,
Yes.
Devin Blankenship,
Yes.
Duncan Campbell,
I don't know. Let me think about it a minute. Yes,
Duncan,
I'll
wrench
vote-
thrower Campbell.
and Danielle Bashan
We'll
Bell.
be
will
by
say
with
yes.
some campaign literature, Duncan.
Polly and Doug, thank you very much. We will all help
Sure.
both of you in this way, because we all have a lot of stuff going on, really, in this grand scheme of it, but we definitely will help in every way we can. So, but thank you for that, because it will smooth things out. I know everybody's anxious to go. I would like to, on my last bit though, I would like to say that we have a draft of a 2022 work plan that it was sent out. I did not get any feedback from anybody that we needed to change anything one way or the other, but we certainly can do that either now or later. If you look at that and you see that there's names that need to be added, deleted, etc. I will just say one quick update on under dry stone walls, just adding to the meeting, being able to meet with Jane, is that when they come back in the spring or whatever point to do the work for Rumpke, they will be in town overnight. And so that will give us the opportunity to talk further with them about surveying the walls in the county. So that will happen. It's on their radar. I will also give an update on the demolition delay and staffing committee that Duncan, Don, and I did have our first Zoom meeting the other day. Yesterday? It was yesterday.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yesterday.
it was yesterday. So we've started talking, we've started formulating an action item to-do list here. So that is in the process.
Thanks for the link.
Oh, you're welcome. There's not been any word on the website, the Limestone Heritage Project website work. I don't know if Tammy would have any communication updates with Wendy. Anyone else have updates on any of the items?
I hear Smithville wants signage, so that's our main update.
This is really a question, but that committee that you and I and Don are on, we called an executive committee. So we might have to put Polly on it.
Sure.
No, the executive committee part was with the Plan Commission Executive Committee.
Right, and
That's where that came from.
I thought that we called ourselves that as well, so that the two executive committees could meet authoritatively. I'm okay with it not being that way. I was just assuming that the chairperson would be on that committee, but
I don't remember it being that way. I think it was just that we were forming a committee that would meet with their executive committee.
okay, that's fine.
So. And I think the only other thing would be the annual property owner notice, which was kind of in this time frame, January, February, to get that out. I don't know if that committee has had a chance to do anything, but we had sent out last month, we'd sent out the letter, which said, look at this. Are there any changes? I don't know that there was any feedback on changes.
Yes.
So did you all receive any feedback on that letter?
No.
Okay. So you're probably good to go to start working on that with Tammy to get that sent out again. How is everybody with with the draft work plan, do we want to approve it? And no longer call it a draft? If you looked at
Let's
it,
get that out of the way.
Let's do it. Let's do it next week, next time.
Okay.
I'll look at it again. I didn't really look at it.
okay,
I'll put that, I'll have Tammy put that as the first thing we do the next meeting.
good thinking. Maybe we won't have any other business next month, other than the Rumpke stuff, which will just be mostly voting, right?
Danielle, I get the distinct feeling that you're dragging this meeting out because you still want to be president.
Nope, nope, I'm trying to get through the agenda.
Well, I want, before you close the meeting, I wanted to thank you for all of us for the hundreds of years you've put in.
Yes.
Yes,
You're welcome.
thank you very much.
Well,
Danielle,
I'll still be doing stuff.
Danielle, you have been absolutely phenomenal. Thank you for everything.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. I'll still do one more thing, which is to, get my last orders of business being to get with Gloria on the Cascades and Tammy on the conditions of approval for the rezone. So I will carry on with that so that Polly doesn't have to be concerned with it. So
Thank you.
thank you, everyone. Are we ready to adjourn?
Yes.
Yes,
All right. Thank you.
thank you very
Thank
much.
Good
Good night,
night.
everyone.
All right, everybody.